So as you may have just heard, The Outer Worlds is getting its second and final expansion, this known as the Murder on Eridanos. Now thankfully, Private Division / Obsidian was kind enough to send me over a code, so I've been able to play the DLC a bit early before its official release date on March 17th. And in this video, I could talk about some of my first impressions on this DLC with my first hour or so of gameplay. This being a particularly interesting DLC in that it is of course the final DLC, the final piece of content we are getting for the Outer Worlds. And this is one that's going to start off and probably immediately suck you in. You'll kick off the DLC by actually watching an episode, or at least part of an episode of the Ether Wave drama, which honestly in its own right is pretty interesting. You rarely get to see the game from this perspective in a cutscene like this, which was pretty cool. This episode featuring our favorite star, Halcyon Helen, and even some of those wonderful product placements, because it wouldn't be the Outer Worlds without that.
But it wasn't just the triple distilled deliciousness of Rizzo's Spectrum brand vodka that I found there.
But halfway through the episode, it does cut to the news that Halcyon Helen has in fact been murdered. And as you could likely tell by the name of this DLC, that is in fact where this questline is going to take us. You'll be traveling to a new area with Eridanos to investigate and hopefully solve the murder of Halcyon Helen, who was very much so loved as a movie star. Right off the bat, one of the really cool parts of this DLC that'll immediately speak out to you is the location, the setting it takes place in. Eridanos is functionally several floating islands with man-made connections in the middle of a giant gas planet. This is definitely going to spawn that video game moment where you take a step back and just take in where you are, because it is an extremely cool looking location. And one of the pretty cool things that'll immediately stand out even beyond that is not only will you think this is a pretty awesome location, but even further you will hear your companions commentate that to you.
I've been starting to play a little game as we travel. You might be a top runger if your hotel is taller than the highest mountain on Monarch.
It's a really nice thing they've done all throughout the base game, the first DLC, and thankfully it's continued in the second DLC, where companions will just make little comments here or there about how this is a really beautiful place. It doesn't look like you're working, it looks like you're on vacation. And all throughout my first hour, they very much so were commentating or making remarks on various things we ran into, and it really does up the immersion factor in a way. It makes you feel like you are not traveling alone. They're not just some random body that stores stuff for you and is somewhat helpful in combat, but no, they're actually taking this all in too. It's nice to see they haven't forgotten or neglected that part of the game, even with some of these DLC expansions. But one of the other cool factors that definitely ups the immersion is all of the hotel guests and even the hotel staff, which are speculating and curious about this recent murder that just literally took place here. As you're walking by, you'll hear rumblings from people left and right about what they think could have happened, who it must have been to commit this, whether it be the ex-boyfriend, the co-star, maybe even some other factor. All this happens right in the first couple of minutes of landing at this location, and it does setting the scene and creating the correct atmosphere for this questline. From there, you'll talk to some of the locals and some of the investigators, but really what you're doing here is launching an investigation of your own, trying to figure out what exactly happened to Halcyon Helen. And one of the cool features implemented with this that adds a lot of character to this is the discrepancy amplifier. This is technically a new weapon in the game, but really it's a magnifying glass that allows you to investigate scenes. Use it right off the bat as you start this quest, actually investigating next to the body. And of course, since this is the Outer Worlds, the discrepancy amplifier is not just some quiet item that will sit in your inventory and by your side, but rather a weapon / magnifying glass that has a full-on personality that will interact with you, commentate on the things you find, and even remind you when it should be used when you enter into a new area. And via this, you definitely get some of those laughs. The Outer Worlds all throughout has been a very funny game, and that is definitely maintained here. One of the other cool new features with this is, in this hotel, you are staying in the penthouse suite, which in many ways will almost act as kind of a secondary base for you. Outside of your typical ship, some of your companions will also reside in your penthouse suite, making it feel like you really are staying here. It's not just a brief pit stop. And in addition, in very nice detective fashion, you also do have this pin board you can find in your penthouse that'll be populated with new and additional information as you progress through the quest and find some of those additional clues. And really, at its core, Murder on Eridanos is very much so also more of the Outer Worlds. It's not like this is all of a sudden trying to become a combat-focused game. In this DLC, you'll be talking to people, and it continues that nice formula of giving you the amount of depth you want. So if you want to have a brief or quick conversation with a character, you can pretty quickly get the information you need to progress the quest and move on. But there's a lot of characters in this and a lot of dialogue options that are there and optional. If you want to dive a bit deeper and perhaps even find out some stuff you wouldn't otherwise, you can spend a lot of time talking. Just in the first little bit, I found a couple of side objectives and missions, as well as one side quest with fixing a pool, and thus far the DLC definitely does a good job of making you feel like there's a lot happening around you and a lot for you to do. If you're a completionist, you could probably spend a good while just in this hotel. Tons of doors, tons of floors, and tons of people to talk to. And then as you venture out, there are several other connecting islands with many other people to talk to and things to do. Eridanos immediately draws you into the broader world, trying to find out who is to blame for this murder. Some of the characters you hear about immediately as suspect, some characters you start to suspect as you progress some of the quests, but even further, at least in this first hour, it didn't feel like there was any shortage of things to do. Between some of the main quests you do gain access to, and again, some of that side content. But at the same time, if you're looking for something to completely change up the formula, this probably isn't that. The mystery aspect and some of those new features they add on to actually make that mystery aspect feel more substantial definitely are welcome and fun additions, but again, this is the Outer Worlds. And based off my first hour, it feels like there is a wealth of new content here that I think a lot of people are definitely going to enjoy. With that said, down the line, I definitely will have my own review to look at the scope of this content overall, as well as just how good it is, how good of an ending note for the Outer Worlds overall. But my first impressions are definitely positive, and I'm excited to share more as I progress it. With that said, I thank you all again for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.